The screaming reached him long before he saw anything. At first, Alex Carter thought the sound was just the wind cutting across the prairie, but the voice kept breaking through the heat in sharp, painful bursts. It didn't sound like someone calling for help. It sounded like someone trying not to disappear. He nudged his horse forward, unsure what he was riding into, but something in his gut already knew it was bad. Emily Parker hung twisted on a rough wooden frame in the open plain, one leg pulled high by a coarse rope that bit deep into her thigh. Her dress was torn by splinters and dust, leaving her fighting to pull the fabric down with her bound wrists. Every tug only scraped her skin more. The sun had baked her until she looked half ghost, half stubborn survivor. She didn't even try to shout when she saw him. She just stared, shaking, like she wasn't sure if he was real. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. This story gets much more intense, and I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Her fears sharpened when his horse slowed beside her. She wished with every ounce of breath left in her body that it wasn't one of Prescott's men coming back to finish what they'd started. They had tied her here laughing, saying the heat would make her tell the truth. But there was nothing to confess. Nothing except the secret she had already paid for with bruises and shame. Alex slid out of the saddle and stepped toward her. He didn't speak. He just stared, stunned, at the sight of a woman left hanging in the burning wind like she was meant to be forgotten. Then his eyes dropped, unintentionally, instinctively, toward the place she had been trying so hard to hide. A sudden jolt of shame shot through her, and her voice cracked out of her throat. "Don't look there." Alex jerked his gaze away at once, jaw tight, guilt flushing across his face. But he couldn't pretend he hadn't seen the bruises, the marks, the cruelty carved into her skin. He couldn't pretend someone hadn't done this with full intention of breaking her. For a second, Emily thought he might leave, just like the others had. Men passed through this land every day. Most didn't stop for anything that wasn't their business. She felt her ribs twist with fear at the idea of hearing his horse ride away, leaving her to the heat and the vultures. But Alex didn't move toward his saddle. He stepped closer instead, slow, cautious, like he was approaching a wild creature that had been hurt too many times. Emily tried to pull her legs together, trying to hide what little dignity she still had. "Don't look there," she whispered again, barely audible. "I'm not," he said quietly, lifting both hands to show he meant no harm. "You look like you're dying. That's why I'm here." His voice was rough but gentle, the voice of a man who carried more ghosts than pride. Emily felt in the way he moved. Careful, honest, unsure of himself, but sure he couldn't leave her like this. He circled the wooden frame, fingers tracing the ropes, checking the knots. When he saw how deep they cut into her skin, he cursed under his breath. Prescott's men tied knots like that. Knots meant to hurt, meant to humiliate. If he did this, Alex muttered, it wasn't just to scare you. Emily squeezed her eyes shut. A tear slid down her cheek. When he touched her ankle lightly to check circulation, she jerked from pure instinct. "Easy," he said, "just making sure you can feel your foot." "I can feel everything," she whispered, "and I wish I couldn't." Alex looked up at her then, and their eyes met without fear for the first time. She saw understanding in him. He saw truth in her. That single look told him she wasn't guilty of whatever Prescott claimed. She wasn't wicked. She was a woman trying to survive a world that liked breaking the softest people first. He took in a slow breath. "I'm getting you down." But before he could reach for his knife, the ground started trembling with approaching hoofbeats. Fast, familiar, dangerous. Two riders were coming back. Prescott's men. Emily's heart slammed against her ribs. Alex didn't get time to think. He pressed close to her, heat from his chest brushing her side. "Hold on," he murmured. His knife flashed. The rope on her wrist snapped. Blood rushed painfully back into her arms. She bit down on a cry, more from pride than strength. He cut her raised leg free next, catching her as she sagged. For a moment her dress slipped again, and she whispered through clenched teeth, "Don't look there." "I'm not," he said, already pulling off his coat and wrapping it around her hips in a quick, rough motion. The riders came into view, slowing their horses with cocky grins. And in that instant, Emily realized something terrifying. Alex had chosen to save her. Now the cost of that choice was riding straight toward them. The two riders slid to a stop, dust spraying around their boots as they stared at the scene. One was thin, sharp-faced, with teeth that looked like they'd been carved out of old corn. The other smelled of cheap whiskey, even from a distance, his eyes glassy with the lazy confidence of a man who thought nothing could touch him. Both men looked at Emily first, at the coat wrapped around her, at the ropes hanging loose from the frame. Then their gazes shifted to Alex. The skinny one grinned. "Boss said, leave her till sundown," he said. "What are you doing, Carter?" Alex kept Emily behind him as best he could. He didn't reach for his gun. He simply straightened up and answered in a steady voice, changing the schedule. The whiskey-soaked man laughed, sliding a hand toward his revolver. "Heard you used to wear a uniform," he slurred. "Thought you knew how to follow orders." Alex gave a slow, humorless smile. "That's why I quit." The skinny man swung down from his horse, boots crunching on dry dirt. His hand hovered near his holster. "Step away from the girl." Alex moved first, even though he wasn't young enough to be fast anymore. His fist crashed into the man's jaw with a sickening thud. Pain shot up Alex's arm, but he saw the man stumble back, dizzy and angry. Before Alex could recover, the man lunged forward and slammed a fist across Alex's nose. Warm blood spilled instantly. The second rider yanked out his gun. Alex grabbed his wrist, but his grip wasn't as quick as it once had been. The man drove a brutal elbow into Alex's ribs, right where an old war scar always flared when the weather turned cold. The pain was blinding, dropping Alex to one knee, breath ragged. The gun slipped from the drunk man's hand and hit the dirt, right beside Emily. For a heartbeat, she just stared at it, her hands trembling, her body barely able to hold itself upright. She had never fired a gun in her life, but something stronger than fear kicked in, a stubborn pride that refused to let these men win again. She grabbed the pistol with both hands. Her fingers shook so hard she almost dropped it, but she lifted it anyway, pointing it skyward. The shot cracked across the prairie like thunder. Both men flinched and froze, eyes snapping toward her. Dust drifted from the frame where the bullet hit nothing but air, but Emily stood there with wild eyes and a smoking gun, breathing like each breath burned her throat. "You want to try that again?" she shouted, voice shaking but loud. "Next time I might not miss." The riders stared between her and Alex, calculating. Whatever courage the whiskey had given them dissolved quick. The skinny one rubbed his jaw, muttering. The drunk wiped sweat from his lip. They backed toward their horses, watching Emily like she was something new and dangerous. They mounted in a rush and rode off, their curses fading into the distance. Alex touched his nose and winced at the blood. He spat a dark streak into the dirt. Then he turned to Emily, breath uneven. "Can you ride?" he asked. "I'll fall," she whispered, overwhelmed, shaking. "I'll catch you." He lifted her into the saddle, his arms strong despite the pain in his ribs. She wobbled, nearly sliding, but he steadied her with a hand on her back. Then he swung up behind her, one arm firm around her waist, the other gripping the reins. The horse bolted forward, hooves beating the earth as they left the frame and the danger behind. The prairie wind struck Emily's face, cold against her fevered skin. Her body sagged back against Alex's chest, all strength draining out of her. Her fingers loosened in the horse's mane. "Stay with me," he murmured near her ear, but her eyes were already rolling closed. The steady thump of his heartbeat pressed into her back, and it pulled her under like a lullaby she hadn't chosen. The world tilted sideways, then went black. When Emily woke again, the sky had turned a soft mix of blue and silver. They were tucked into a rocky hollow above a narrow creek, the kind of hiding place only a man who'd ridden every inch of the land would know. Alex had built a small fire that crackled quietly, and he sat beside her with a damp bandana in his hand. Her fever returned in waves throughout the night. She shivered, then burned, then clawed weakly at her shirt as fragments of memories ripped out of her in broken whispers. Numbers, cattle, a boot pressing her face into dirt, laughter that didn't belong to humans. Alex soaked the cloth again and laid it across her forehead, wiping sweat from her neck, her cheek, the uninjured parts of her leg. His touch stayed careful, respectful, hands steady even when his eyes looked like they were fighting back old ghosts. Once, half-conscious, she whispered, "Don't look there." "I'm not," he whispered back. "I'm just keeping you here." By the second sunrise, her breathing steadied. Her fever broke like a storm, losing strength. She blinked at the streaks of pink sky, exhausted but alive. Alex sat near the fire, watching her with tired eyes. For the first time since that frame, Emily believed she wasn't alone. Emily tried to sit up, but her arms felt like wet rope. The world tilted for a second, and Alex moved fast, steadying her with a hand at her back. His touch was warm, firm, a little rough from years of work, but gentle in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. "You're all right," he said softly. "Just breathe." She hated how her body leaned into him before she could stop it, hated how weak she felt, but she didn't pull away. Her throat tightened at the thought of how close she had come to dying out there alone, tied to that frame like she was nothing. Alex gave her space the moment she found her balance. He stepped back, almost too quickly, like he didn't want her to feel cornered. She pulled his coat tighter around herself, grateful that the morning breeze hid her trembling. "I need to look at your leg," he said. He didn't reach for her. He waited, as if waiting was the only thing he could offer. Emily swallowed. "Not there." His eyes lifted to hers, steady, calm, patient. "It's not for me," he said. "It's for you." Something broke loose in her chest at the way he said it. Not demanding, not shaming, just truth spoken gently. She gave the smallest nod, her chin trembling. Alex knelt beside her, keeping his gaze on her face until she nodded again. Only then did he lower his eyes and check the damage. She watched his jaw tense as he saw the swollen, bruised skin around the brand, the rope burns where her leg had been pulled unnaturally high. He let out a tight breath, the kind of man lets out when he's trying not to curse. "He should be in chains for this," Alex muttered. Emily stared at the ground. "He owns half the cattle in Lincoln," she said, "and the law eats at his table." Alex cleaned the angry red skin with slow, careful strokes, using a torn strip from his own shirt. Every touch burned, but the care behind it soothed something far deeper. Something she hadn't realized had been aching for a long time. "Why did he do this to you?" Alex asked quietly. She hesitated. Her mouth felt dry. Her heart raced like she was tied to that frame again. But Alex had seen the marks. There was nothing left to hide. "I counted cattle," she whispered. His men brought in herds bigger than what anyone reported missing. "I told him the numbers didn't make sense." She forced a breath. "He said my eyes were the problem." Alex paused. His hand stopped moving. When he looked at her, there was something sharp in his expression, anger, but not at her. Anger reserved for men who thought cruelty counted as power. "He tied me up so nobody would listen," she continued. "He wanted people to talk about my shame instead of his theft." Alex didn't say he was sorry. He didn't offer some empty line that meant nothing. He just nodded in a slow, heavy way, like he was carrying part of her story now. "You didn't have to stay," Emily said. "You could have ridden away." "Maybe," he said quietly, "but I saw what he carved into you. If I ride away from that, I'm no better than him." Silence settled between them, but it wasn't cold this time. It felt like a blanket laid gently over a painful truth. The sun climbed slowly over the rocky ridge, turning the edges of the world gold. Emily watched the colors spread across the sky. She didn't feel safe yet, not truly, but she felt something close to it, like standing in a doorway with the light finally hitting her face. She looked at Alex again. His ribs still hurt. She could see it in the way he held himself. His knuckles were scraped, his nose bruised, but he didn't complain. He didn't look like a hero. He looked like a man who made a choice that scared him as much as it saved her. "What are you going to do?" she asked softly. "When Prescott comes looking for you because of me." Alex stared out toward the horizon, eyes following the wide stretch of land like it held the answer. "When I wore the uniform," he said, "I did what I was told. Sometimes that meant watching things happen that shouldn't be happened. I promised myself I wouldn't look away again." He nudged a small stone with his boot. "But we're not riding into Lincoln tomorrow. Not while you can barely stand and I'm breathing like an old mule." Emily almost smiled at that, and the tiny flicker of humor surprised her. Alex noticed and for a second his eyes softened, really softened, like he was seeing her more than her wounds. It didn't linger long. Alex saddled the horse again, though his ribs fought him with every movement. He helped Emily mount, moving slower now, more mindful. She held the saddle horn, her legs trembling. "Lean back if you need to," he murmured. She hesitated, then did. Her head brushed his shoulder as he climbed up behind her. His arm came around her lightly, just enough to steady her, not enough to trap her. The horse started forward, heading toward a small ranch tucked in the next valley. A place Alex said belonged to a friend, a man named Cal Turner, who owed him more than a handshake. Emily didn't know what waited for her there, but for the first time since she'd screamed into the empty heat, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen. By the time they reached the small ranch tucked between the hills, Emily could barely keep her eyes open. The place wasn't much, just a weathered house, a half-collapsed barn, and a yard that looked like it had been kicked around by too many horses. But the smoke curling from the chimney and the soft glow of lamplight made it feel safer than anything Emily had seen in days. Alex helped her down from the horse. His hands were steady, but she could feel the tension in his body as he lowered her. Pain flashed across his face again. The ribs he tried so hard to pretend weren't bothering him. She tried to stand on her own, but her legs shook under her weight. Before she could fall, Alex caught her around the waist. "I got you," he murmured. The door opened before Alex could knock. A thick-built man with gray in his beard stepped out, squinting into the fading light. The second he saw Emily, his face changed. Something hard replaced the calm. "Tell me Prescott didn't do that," he said. Alex didn't answer with words. He didn't need to. Cal Turner looked at Emily again, eyes tracing the bruises, the dried blood, the fear she was trying so hard to hide. His jaw tightened in a way that said more than any speech could. "Bring her inside," Cal said. "Now!" The warmth of the house wrapped around her as soon as they entered. It smelled like coffee and dust and old wood. The table was cluttered with tools, rope, a half-finished saddle. Emily felt the weight of the room, ordinary, lived-in, safe. A place where people whispered, not screamed. Cal laid a blanket on a small cot near the stove. Alex helped her sit, careful like she was made of something fragile. Cal crouched down beside her, shoulders tense. "What did he do?" he asked Alex quietly. Emily answered first, her voice thin. "He branded me." Cal's eyes flicked up to hers, and something old and dark moved behind them. A memory maybe, or just rage so deep it didn't need a name. He stood up and poured coffee, so strong she could smell it from across the room. "You're safe here," he said, setting the cup near her. "Nobody's touching you again." Emily wanted to believe him. She really did. 2 hours later, the kitchen was filled with more men. 4 of them, all older, all worn down by years of hard living. They came because Cal sent word. They stayed because one look at Emily told them everything. The brand, the bruises, the trembling in her hands. None of them asked if she deserved it. None of them wondered what she had done. They just looked at her like she was someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone worth fighting for. One man with a limp said quietly, "Prescott's been stealing cattle for years. Everyone knows, but nobody has proof." Another man leaned back in his chair. "Well, now we do." Emily felt her throat close. Proof meant showing people what Prescott had carved into her skin. Proof meant the whole town knowing, staring, whispering, judging her for something she never chose. Alex sensed at the moment her breathing changed. He stepped beside her, lowering his voice so only she could hear. "You don't have to do anything alone." She nodded barely. Cal's nephew rode out early the next morning, heading to Lincoln to bring back a photographer, the kind who carried old equipment on horseback. The thought of being photographed made Emily's stomach twist. She didn't want that mark captured forever. She didn't want men studying her pain on a piece of paper. But when the photographer arrived and pulled out the heavy camera, Emily didn't turn away. She lifted her chin. Alex stood beside her, not touching, but close enough that she felt steadier. Cal stayed in the doorway, hands clenched. The other men kept silent, eyes lowered out of respect. Emily closed her eyes for a second, gathering what little strength she had. When she opened them, her voice didn't shake. "Do it." The camera clicked. Once. Twice. The sound echoed like a closing door, a door she would never walk back through. That night, as the men made plans, Emily sat near the stove watching the fire crackle. Every movement reminded her of pain, but she wasn't scared in the same way anymore. Not because she felt strong, not because she felt healed, because she wasn't alone. Alex sat across from her, elbows on his knees, staring into the flames. He looked worn down, bruised, tired from the fight and the ride and the worry. But when he lifted his gaze and caught her watching him, something quiet passed between them. Not romance, not comfort, recognition. He had saved her life. She had given him a reason to fight again. And neither of them knew what came next. But they knew they were facing it together. The morning they rode back toward Lincoln, the air felt heavier than the sky itself. Emily sat on the horse in front of Alex, her back pressed lightly against his chest. She wasn't fully healed. Her legs still throbbed with every step the horse took, and the bruises along her ribs stung whenever she breathed too deep, but she felt steadier. Cal had given her a clean dress and a shawl, and though she still hated how fragile she looked, she no longer felt like something broken. Alex's arms circled her waist, steady but respectful, guiding the reins with a quiet confidence that made her feel safer than she expected. Behind them rode Cal and the 4 men who had filled the kitchen the night before, silent, grim, ready to walk straight into trouble. Emily kept her eyes on the distant shape of the town. It didn't feel like a place. It felt like a verdict waiting to happen. "You don't have to say anything when we get there," Alex murmured behind her. She didn't answer. The truth was, she didn't know what she was strong enough to do. She wasn't scared of Prescott. She was scared of the looks, the whispers, the way townspeople could turn a woman's pain into entertainment. "What if they don't believe me?" she asked quietly. Alex leaned closer, his voice low. "They will. And if they don't," he paused, choosing each word like it mattered. "Then they'll believe me." They rode into Lincoln just as the sun began sinking behind the ridge. People stopped what they were doing when they saw the group: old soldiers, weathered men, and a woman wrapped in a shawl with fear in her eyes. Conversations went quiet. Heads turned. Emily felt the weight of every stare, each one pressing against her skin like a stone she had to carry. Prescott came out of his office the moment someone ran to tell him Alex Carter was back, and not alone. He was a big man, red in the face, his confidence thick enough to choke on. He stepped onto the porch, seeing Alex first, then Emily, then Cal and the others. His expression twisted into something between a smirk and a snarl. "You're a fool, Carter," Prescott said loudly, making sure the whole street heard. "Bringing back that lying girl? She's been trying to ruin me for weeks. And you," he jabbed a finger at Alex. "You're not a lawman. You're a has-been. You should have kept riding." Alex didn't bother answering him. He just looked at Emily and gave a tiny nod, an invitation, not pressure. Emily felt her throat tighten. Her hands shook. She wasn't sure she could do it. Then she remembered the frame, the sun, the shame, the way Prescott's men laughed while she begged for help. She stepped forward. The crowd leaned in, breaths held, eyes locked on her. Prescott laughed. "Oh, come on now. You really want to embarrass yourself in front of half the territory?" Emily kept walking. Her voice came out soft at first. "You told them not to look at me." Prescott's smirk stiffened. "You told them," she said louder, "that if they looked, they'd see something sinful, something shameful." A hush fell across the crowd. Alex stepped beside her, not touching but close. Emily's voice shook, but she didn't stop. "You told them to look away, so no one would see what you really are." Whispers rippled through the street. Curious, uncertain. Emily swallowed hard, then lifted the hem of her dress just enough to show the edge of the brand. Gasps scattered through the crowd. A woman covered her mouth. A man cursed under his breath. Prescott's face drained of color before turning an ugly shade of red. "You expect anyone to believe." He didn't finish the sentence. A uniformed officer stepped forward, a man from Fort Stanton summoned by Cal's telegram. His voice was calm, official. "I'll be doing the believing today." Prescott opened his mouth, but the officer didn't give him the chance. "We've received statements," he said, lifting a stack of papers. "And photographs." He nodded toward Cal. Of cattle that don't belong to you. Of marks carved into the skin of someone you tried to silence. The street erupted, voices rising, murmurs turning into anger. Prescott turned in a circle like a trapped animal, searching for someone to defend him. Nobody did. The officer motioned, and 2 soldiers stepped forward. Prescott shouted, cursed, threatened, but his words carried no weight anymore. They grabbed his arms and held him fast as irons were clamped around his wrists. For a moment, everything stopped. Emily stood there shaking, not from fear, at least not the same kind as before, but from the strange, overwhelming relief of finally being seen. Alex moved closer to her, speaking softly, so only she could hear. You did that, he said. She looked at him, eyes wet but steady. I couldn't have done it without you. His expression softened. You didn't do it because of me. You did it because you had the truth. Behind them, Prescott was dragged through the street, no longer the hunter, just a man whose lies finally caught up to him. Emily watched him disappear into the growing crowd, then let out a breath she'd been holding for days. A long, shaking breath that felt like the beginning of something new. The town didn't calm down for a long time after Prescott was taken away. People spilled out of shops, leaning over balconies, whispering like they were afraid to breathe too loud. Emily stood in the middle of the street, her hands trembling, her heart racing in her chest so fast it almost hurt. Alex stayed beside her, watching her face carefully, as if he was waiting for the moment she might collapse. When she finally looked up at him, her voice came out in a thin breath. Is it really over? Alex shook his head slowly. No, but the worst part is behind you. She exhaled a shaky laugh. That doesn't feel possible. Trust me, he said. His voice softened. You stood in front of an entire town and spoke truth while the man who hurt you tried to burn you down with lies. That takes more courage than anything I've ever done. She felt her throat close. I was scared. Being scared doesn't mean you weren't brave. Before she could answer, Cal and the other men joined them, their faces heavy but proud. Cal rested a rough hand on Emily's shoulder. You changed something today, he said. People will talk about this for a long time. Emily looked down, fingers twisting the edge of her shawl. I don't want them to talk about me. Cal shook his head. They won't be talking about you. They'll be talking about what he did. There's a difference. Alex stepped closer, lowering his voice. You don't owe this town anything. You don't owe me anything either. She frowned at him, confused. Why does it sound like you're telling me goodbye? He hesitated. Something in his posture shifted, some old instinct to pull back, to disappear before he caused trouble. I know men like Prescott don't go down quiet. There'll be anger. Talk. People choosing sides. Emily stared at him, studying the lines in his face. Are you trying to leave before any of that reaches you? He lowered his gaze. I've made a habit of walking away before things get complicated. She stepped toward him, closer than she had been since that rocky hollow by the creek. You walked toward me when I was tied to that frame. Alex's breath caught a little. That was different. No, she whispered. It wasn't. You think you're meant to be alone. But you're wrong. You can't save someone and then vanish like you never mattered. His voice cracked in a way she hadn't heard before. Emily, I'm no good at staying. She swallowed hard. Then learn. He blinked, stunned by the simplicity of it. Cal cleared his throat. I hate to break the moment, but the officer wants statements from everyone. And Emily, he softened his tone. He wants to hear from you too. Emily's stomach twisted. She didn't want to repeat everything. Didn't want to relive the details. The brand, the fear, the humiliation. But she lifted her chin. I'll do it, she said. Alex stepped beside her again, offering his arm. Not because she needed it, but because he wanted her to know she didn't have to walk alone. Emily hesitated before taking it. The crowd watched as they approached the deputy's office. Inside, the light was dim and the air smelled like old paper and gun oil. The officer sat behind a desk, sorting through reports and photographs. He glanced up as they entered. Miss Parker, he said, standing politely. I need to ask you a few questions. You can take your time. Emily nodded. Alex moved to stand behind her, hands clasped, eyes steady. The officer began gently. Can you tell me, in your own words, Why Prescott targeted you. Emily's voice trembled at first, but as she continued, something stronger took hold. A quiet force born from truth. He wanted me scared, she said. He wanted me silent. I counted cattle, and he didn't like how the numbers looked. The officer nodded. And the brand? Emily's eyes filled, but her voice didn't falter. He wanted my shame to cover his crimes. Alex stepped forward, anger tightening his jaw. He tortured her, he said. His voice was controlled but sharp. He tied her to a frame like she was an animal. You make sure that's written down exactly like that. The officer nodded. Already did. The questions continued, steady and respectful. By the time they were done, Emily's body felt drained, but lighter, as if saying the truth out loud had carved out space in her chest that she didn't know she needed. When they stepped outside again, the sun had dipped below the hills and lanterns flickered along the wooden porches. The evening wind brushed through the street, cool and gentle. Emily wrapped the shawl tighter around her shoulders. What happens now? She asked. Alex looked at her carefully. Now, you breathe. You rest. You let people who care about you stand close. And you? She whispered. He didn't answer right away. His eyes softened, warm and sincere. I stay, he said quietly. If you want me to. Emily didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply nodded, as if her heart had already known the answer. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like something taken. She felt like someone choosing. The next few days settled over the town like a slow-moving storm. Everyone talked, at the well, in the saloon, under the shade of store awnings. Emily wasn't sure if the whispers were meant to comfort or choke her. Every time she walked outside, she felt eyes on her. Curious eyes, pitying eyes, angry eyes. Some people nodded at her with respect. Others looked away quickly, as if her truth might somehow stain them. Alex stayed close, not hovering, not controlling, just there. Sometimes that meant sitting on the porch beside her in silence. Sometimes it meant standing between her and a stranger's stare. Cal checked in every morning, bringing biscuits or stew, pretending it was for Alex, but always pushing the bowl toward her first. One afternoon, when the heat settled in thick waves over the street, a woman approached Emily near the general store. She was older, with tired eyes and a voice that sounded like it had carried too many secrets. I heard what happened, the woman said softly. Emily's fingers tightened around the basket she carried. She nodded, unsure how to respond. The woman stepped closer, lowering her voice. Men like Prescott, they count on women staying quiet. She paused, swallowing. Thank you for not staying quiet. Emily blinked, surprised. I wasn't brave. I was terrified. The woman nodded. Bravery doesn't mean you weren't scared. It means you spoke anyway. Emily watched her walk away, feeling something warm flicker in her chest. A small flame she hadn't expected. A feeling she hadn't let herself consider. Maybe she wasn't just a victim to people. Maybe she was something else now. But the peace didn't last. That evening, as the sun dipped behind a ridge, two men from Prescott's crew rode into town. Not the same ones from the frame. Different men, bigger, harder, with that same cruel confidence beaten into their bones. They didn't look at Emily first. They looked at Alex. One of them spat in the dust. Carter, he said. Word is you turned on your own. Alex didn't move. He didn't even blink. I didn't turn on anyone, he said. I just finally stopped looking away. The taller man glared past him at Emily. She's lying. You know she is, Prescott said. Emily stepped forward before Alex could. Her voice shook, but her eyes didn't. Prescott said a lot of things, she interrupted. He said no one would ever look at me and see the truth. He was wrong. The men stared at her like she had no right to speak. One laughed, mean and sharp. You think that brand makes people believe you? Emily's breaths came fast, but she didn't back away. No, she said. The truth does. Alex stepped in front of her then, not to silence her, but to shield her from the anger rising in their faces. You boys should ride out, Alex warned quietly. Right now. The taller one sneered. Or what? You're going to throw another punch like last time? Alex didn't raise his fists. He didn't reach for his gun. He just stood there, shoulders straight, voice low and steady. I'll do whatever I have to do, he said. She's not standing alone anymore. The street had fallen silent. People watched from porches and store windows. Even the breeze seemed to pause, waiting. The second man nudged his horse closer. Prescott's got friends in this town. People who won't like what you did. Then they can come talk to me, Alex said. I'm done being scared of the wrong people. Emily felt the words hit her like a pulse. Strong, certain, true. The men glared at her one last time, riding slow so their anger could sink into the dirt behind them. But they didn't strike. They didn't threaten. Not with fists. Not with guns. They backed down. When they were gone, Emily let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Her knees buckled slightly, and Alex grabbed her elbow, steadying her. You okay? He asked. She nodded, but her voice cracked. Why did you say that? That I'm not alone. Alex hesitated. For the first time since she'd met him, he looked nervous, like he was trying to find the right words and didn't trust himself. Because it's true, he said. Emily looked at him, really looked, and something in her chest loosened. Something that had been locked up ever since she saw Prescott's men riding toward her on that terrible day. Alex, she said softly, I don't know how to be strong all the time. He shook his head. You don't have to be. What if the fear comes back? Then I'll stand with you. She swallowed. For how long? His voice dropped to a whisper. As long as you want me there. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. It wasn't a promise made out of pity or duty. It wasn't some heroic vow. It was simple, human, true. Emily felt a warmth rise through her. Quiet, unfamiliar, but real. For the first time since everything happened, she didn't feel like she was rebuilding her life alone. She felt like someone was standing beside her while she did it. The sun rose slower on the morning. Everything changed. Emily stood on Alex's porch, watching the prairie glow gold under the early light. The world looked different, still rough, still wide and unforgiving, but no longer like something waiting to crush her. For the first time in a long while, she wasn't waking up to fear. She was waking up to possibility. Alex stepped out behind her, coffee in hand, boots creaking against the wood. He looked tired, but the kind of tired that comes from finally resting instead of running. When she glanced at him, he gave her a small smile, quiet, real. You slept better last night, he said. Emily nodded. I dreamed about the river, she whispered. Not the frame, not the brand, just the sound of the water. That's a good dream, Alex said. She wrapped her arms around herself, the morning breeze brushing her hair. She didn't say what she was really thinking, that she had started dreaming again only because she no longer felt alone. The door swung open behind them. Cal stepped out with a newspaper folded under his arm. His eyes were sharper than usual. It's printed, he said, tapping the paper. Whole story. Everything Prescott did. The brand. The stolen cattle. The witnesses. He paused. The truth. Emily felt her breath catch. People will read it? Cal nodded. People already are. She braced herself for the fear, for the shame to return. But it didn't. Instead, she felt something warm settle in her chest. A strange mix of relief and power. What Prescott had carved into her skin was now carved into the town's memory, but not as her shame, as his crime. Alex watched her face carefully. You okay? Emily turned toward him. I think. I'm more than okay. They rode into Lincoln only once more after everything settled. Not because they had to, but because Emily wanted to see the town with her own eyes, without fear twisting her stomach. As they walked through the street, people looked at her differently now. Not with pity. Not with judgment, with respect. A woman at the bakery handed her fresh bread and said, You're stronger than anyone I know. A rancher tipped his hat. My daughter's got your picture in her home. Says you're braver than any man she's ever met. An older couple paused to tell Alex, You did right, son. Hard thing, standing up when everyone else stays quiet. Emily listened. She didn't cry. She didn't hide. She just let the words land like gentle rain on dry ground. Later that afternoon, she and Alex walked out toward the edge of town where the prairie stretched into the horizon. The wind picked up again, warm and soft. Emily stopped, looking out at the open land. You know, she said, if you had ridden away that day, I don't think I would have believed I was worth saving. Alex stood beside her. Emily, he said quietly, you were worth saving long before I showed up. You just needed someone to remind you. She closed her eyes for a moment, the breeze brushing past her like a whispered prayer. When she opened them, she turned to Alex. "What about you?" she asked gently. "What did all this remind you of?" Alex hesitated, then looked out at the land like he was seeing old memories in the dust. "That I spent a lot of years watching things happen and telling myself I couldn't change them," he said. "But you made me remember the kind of man I always meant to be." Emily felt something shift, slow and deep. Not romance, not magic, just human connection, honest and steady. "What happens now?" she asked softly. Alex smiled at her, small, warm, simple. "Now." He glanced at the horizon. "Now we rebuild. Slow. One day at a time." She nodded. "Together." His voice was quiet but certain. "Yeah, together." They stood that way for a long moment, the prairie wind surrounding them, not as enemies to fear, but as witnesses to something new being built from old hurt. And there, with the land stretching endlessly before them, the moral of their story settled into Emily's heart like truth finally finding its place. When they tell you not to look, sometimes it is exactly when you must. Because truth only heals when someone is brave enough to face it, and brave enough to stand beside the person who carries it. Emily looked at Alex. Alex looked at her. Two survivors. Two fighters. Not broken. Not forgotten. Just human. Finally seen.